Welcome to Hampton University Online, Diversity and Cultural Awareness. This is Marilyn Armstrong. My study this week has taken me on a journey of deeper understanding of race and ethnicity in America. It has challenged me to reconsider some things that I thought I knew and provided me many aha moments that have connected the dots for me for many situations that I've heard about since I was a child. Before I summarize the readings and videos and share my thoughts, I'd like to pause to define race and ethnicity. Unit 12 and video number 1 define race as a fundamentally social construct based on superficial physical differences that a particular society considers significant. Social science organizations reject biological explanations of race. Race is not biologically identifiable and isn't arbitrarily assigned based on pseudoscience. Race is used to justify discriminatory practices. Ethnicity, however, is shared culture and national origin. Terms matter. What is a minority group? Sociologist Lewis Worth defined a minority group as any group of people who, because of their physical or cultural characteristics, are singled out from the others in the society in which they live for differential and unequal treatment, and who are therefore regard themselves as objects of collective discrimination. We could use the term subordinate group instead of minority group, or dominant group instead of majority group. Why? Dominance is power. Lack of power is the predominant characteristics of a minority group. The term majority group may be a gentler term, but dominant group is closer to reality. So Unit 12 covers a wealth of information, including but not limited to prejudice and race, sociological theories to explain race and ethnicity such as fundamentalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionalism, intergroup relationships such as pluralism, assimilation, amalgamation, and even genocide, and the specific histories and experiences of races, ethnic groups in the United States, specifically Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, Arab Americans, and white ethnic Americans. Video number 1 is entitled Racial Ethnic Prejudice and Discrimination. It is a crash course in sociology that covered much of what was covered in Unit 12. Additionally, and of note, the narrator describes sociological theories of why racism exists. Authoritarian personality theory. They see prejudice as an outgrowth of a certain personality profile, one that's associated with authoritarianism. They have a strong desire for order, tradition, and strong leaders who maintain the status quo. Scapegoat theory. They blame those in the subordinate group for their perceived lack of good jobs and other economic disadvantages. Culture theory. Some prejudice can be found in everyone because people are products of the cultures they live in, and we live in a prejudiced culture. Race conflict theory. How social inequality develops as the result of power conflicts between different racial and ethnic groups. Video number 2 was a TED Talk entitled What Beyonce Taught Me About Race by Brittany Barron, October 2016. Ms. Barron discussed the 10,000 hour rule that contends if you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you become an expert in it, and it becomes automatic, almost second nature. She applied that to racism in the U.S. She pointed out that there were 335 years between 1619, when the first Africans were brought to the United States, and 1954, the year of the landmark Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education. During those 335 years, there were 294 units of 10,000 hours. During that time, this country practiced the dehumanization of, abuse of, exploitation of, and segregation of black people in America. Also, during those 335 years, or 294 units of 10,000 hours, blacks were owned as property, refused citizenship, treated as less than, bought and sold as commodity, used for entertainment, and utterly disregarded. Referring back to the 10,000-hour rule, this country has had 294 units of 10,000 hours to become experts in what they've practiced. What really stuck out to me during this week's study was the discussion of Native Americans in Unit 12. I really learned a lot. The earliest immigrants to America arrived millennia before European immigrants. Christopher Columbus discovered nothing. Native Americans' culture blossomed into an intricate web of hundreds of interconnected tribes, each with its own customs, traditions, languages, and religions. Europeans came to America in 1492. The relationship between European colonists and Native Americans was brutal. Settlers also enslaved Native Americans and forced them to give up their religion and cultural practices. But the major cause of Native American death was neither slavery, nor war, nor forced removal. It was the introduction of European diseases and Indians' lack of immunity to them. Smallpox, diphtheria, and measles flourished among indigenous American tribes who had no exposure to the diseases and had no ability to fight them. Quite simply, these diseases disseminated the tribes. After the establishment of the United States government, discrimination against Native Americans was codified and formalized in a series of laws intended to subjugate them and keep them from gaining any power. Boarding schools were established by the United States government and Christian missionaries to so-called civilize Native Americans and to make them assimilate into white culture. Children were ripped away from their families and were physically and sexually abused. Some scholars argue that many of the problems that Native Americans face today result from almost a century of mistreatment at those boarding schools. Native Americans are not fully respected even today. While I always knew that the former name of my hometown football team, the Redskins, was problematic, I didn't fully understand why. Team and mascot names like Braves, Warriors, and Chiefs are unacceptable. Those names perpetuate the warrior savage myth. They reinforce racist views that Indians are uncivilized and uneducated. Historically, those names were used to justify policies of forced assimilation and destruction of Indian culture. There is no room for that in the 21st century. For 86 years, Washington's football team was named the Redskins. Finally, in 2020, after years of protests, the owners changed the name. The team was renamed the Washington Football Team until 2 years later it was renamed the Washington Commanders. Many, like myself, are happy that the owners finally made the right decision. There are some, however, who refuse to acknowledge the name change. So I have a white coworker who I used to consider a friendly acquaintance. I've always noticed that she's exhibited white privileged, entitled, and even racist tendencies. I struggled with those ways, especially since she refused to even consider what I tried to tell her when I was telling her that she was sounding racist. She just didn't want to hear it. I tried to overlook it because she was a part of the group of people I associated with at work. She's a huge fan of the hometown football team. She has refused to stop calling them the Redskins. I've tried to explain to her that the name is offensive to Native Americans. She asserts that some of them like the name and everyone is making a big deal out of nothing. My attempts to explain to her that if one is offended, then that should be enough. The straw that broke the camel's back for our so-called friendly acquaintanceship was when I visited her in her office one day. She opened the door, and I felt assaulted by the overload of Washington Redskins pendants, jerseys, posters, and other paraphernalia all over the office. At that point, I knew that I could no longer have a relationship with her. There is none so blind as she who will not see. I refuse to associate with anyone who is blatantly racist or discriminatory against anyone. I've enjoyed this week's study very much. My greatest takeaway has been a greater understanding of and respect for the backgrounds of other subordinate groups in America. Unfortunately, however, I have a greater disdain for the British and European colonizers. The effects of their colonization was devastating and has had lasting effects on subordinate groups to this day.